Malta, the miracle economy of the Med. As we've seen in the first two shows, great changes are afoot in these islands. But these changes are of nothing as to the turbulent history of the Maltese islands over the last 2,000 years. Successively, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Sicilians, the Ottomans, the French, and then the British all saw the strategic importance of these islands and fought over them. As we sail into the Grand Harbour of the ancient three cities of Malta, which withstood the Great Siege of 1565, we can see from these battlements, when the forces of Suleiman the Magnificent arrived, they knew they had the numbers, but they were still going to be in for a fight behind these fortifications, and so it was to prove. Where better to pick up the story of these islands than in the Maritime Museum, because the one constant in Maltese history is the sea.
Our series on Malta has attracted a huge number of comments from across the world, from people interested in the progress of the European Union's smallest member state. Last week's programme featured an interview with the editor-in-chief of the Times of Malta. But J.R. Tomlin reminds us of what the Times of London had to say about the prospects for Maltese independence in the late 1950s. Malta cannot live on its own. The island could pay for only 1/5 of her food and essential imports. Well over a quarter of the present labour force would be out of work, and the economy of the country would collapse without British Treasury subventions. Talk of full independence for Malta is therefore hopelessly impractical. Well, today this is what the Times of Malta say about the UK's prospects as Brexit looms. The overwhelming thrust of economic analysis is that a no-deal Brexit would be disastrous for Britain and bad news for the European Union. A no-deal Brexit would be an act of folly. The world has clearly turned upside down. Other reaction focused on Alex's interview with former Prime Minister Dr. Lawrence Gonzi, a show which attracted over 250,000 views on Alex's Facebook page alone. Phantom Power says, excellent interview with the former Prime Minister of Europe's tiniest member, Malta. A successful economy independent for 50 years with a fraction of Scotland's resources. How on earth do they cope without Britain? Lynn says, very interesting show. An independent Scotland would flourish in Europe, proud to be a Scottish European. Susan says, brilliant to hear the lived experience of a very, very small nation joining the European Union. While all may not map onto Scotland's situation, the ambition to transform, transcend and stand on its own feet is entirely relevant. Bravo. Thank you, Susan. Ruth says, very interesting show this morning on Malta. Really good to see how a relatively small country looks after itself, as well as enjoying the benefits of the EU and dealing with a tricky situation with a long-standing trading partner. Malta now on the to-visit list. Livy Elaine Murray says, I'm a Canadian from Vancouver, living in my roots, Scotland. A very good programme you have, Alex, always. Bill says, Malta is inspirational. They have thrived free of their imperialist shackles. Scotland can be the same, a sovereign independent country within the EU. Malta has proved how small nations can thrive and prosper and use their small size to their advantage. There is absolutely nothing to stop Scotland being even more successful. What on earth are we waiting for, says Bill. Ian says, love the island and the people. And Wendy says, I've always hoped to visit someday. Gordon says, my wife is from Malta and supports independence from Westminster. She remembers the bad old days when the British had the best houses and the Maltese were treated like slaves. Under the government of today, they are better off independent of the British. However, some people have tweeted in to question Malta's success. Civic Lillian Wick says, I hope Mr. Salmond will take up Malta's disturbing practice of selling EU citizenship to anyone, often criminals, who is willing to pay the price. And finally, Bob says, please Scots read this. Yes, we can survive without England. Malta has proved it. Now in today's show, Alex moves away from politics and economics to consider Malta's turbulent history and gives a taste of some of the characters enlivening the commercial and nightlife of modern-day Valletta. The Grand Master of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem paid an annual tribute to Emperor Charles V of Spain on All Saints' Day of a single falcon, to acknowledge the granting of Malta, Tripoli and Gozo to the order in 1530. Alec takes up the epic story of the Knights of St. John with Dr. Emanuel Buttigieg of the University of Malta.
Now, in the turbulent and ever-changing history of this Mediterranean island, one constant factor, of course, has been the sea. So where better to explaining it here in the Maritime Museum, and who better with Dr. Emmanuel Buttigieg. Emmanuel, tell us about this wonderful specimen of maritime Malta.
So what we've got here, Alex, is a really wonderful object, quite big, as you can see. It's a working model from the late 18th century, and this would have been used by the cadets of the Order of the Knights of St. John.
This is Knights of St. John, who for 300 years were basically in charge of this island.
In charge of these islands, and of course they are a maritime power above everything else. So they need to train their young ones how to operate the real thing. So this would have been their virtual but real model. Everything works. You can pull the pulleys, raise the sails, move the cannons, so that eventually when you get on board the real thing, you would have had a sense of how it's going to work. And I think it's a beautiful and wonderful object that has miraculously survived and come down to us.
Well, let's go next door and you can tell me a bit more about the wonderful history of these islands.
With pleasure.
Now, Emmanuel, the Knights of St. John had Malta as their base of operations for the best part of 300 years. I'm interested, did they leave their social imprint in the communities of Malta, or were they kind of cocooned away as a military order?
As you rightly point out, they're here for a long time, almost 300 years. The physical imprint is significant and still visible to our eyes. You just need to walk around Valletta and you see the mighty walls, the elegant palaces, the beautiful churches. It's the Baroque of the age. But their imprint goes far deeper than that. You have the economic and the social impact. If you just think that when they get to Malta in 1530, there's barely 20,000 people living here. But by the time they leave in 1798, there's 100,000. That's a five-fold increase in the population. Now, that comes about because the presence of the order here generates a lot of economic activity. Economic activity means you get immigrants who come here because of work opportunities. They're French, they're Greek, they're Italian, they're Spanish. They're mostly men, single, who come here, find work, usually find a lady, settle down and become Maltese over time. And that explains the growth in the population, and also a population that is very urban.
And did the Knights recruit locally in terms of people into their order, and how did that evolve over time?
So technically there could not be any Maltese as a member of the order. The reason being that to be a knight you needed a very exclusive pedigree of nobility. And if you look at the names of these knights, you come across Medici or Strozzi and others. Basically the top noble families of Catholic Europe are represented in it. Now, as a result of that, the order argued that the Maltese nobility was not noble enough, so they could not be knights.
This must have caused a bit of tension.
It did. On the other hand, the order as the government of these islands needed a civil service, and that civil service was largely staffed by Maltese. And that offered, for some of them at least, very, very significant opportunities, not only to be influential, but also to accumulate wealth. I don't think it was a case of, a knight on this side and the Maltese on the other. It really was a symbiotic relationship, because they both knew that one depended on the other, ultimately, and they would benefit as long as both sides are happy with that relationship.
So after these 300 turbulent years, Napoleon Bonaparte arrives and the impregnable fortress falls in a few weeks. How did that come about?
A few hours, in fact. Yes, there's a lot of debate around this. I mean, if you consider how mightily fortified the place was, how come it falls so easily? Well, Napoleon, of course, was a brilliant strategist. He'd done his homework very carefully. He had a lot of spies and informants on the island that really paved the way for him. Moreover, in the years preceding that, because of the French Revolution, which means that the order is losing all these properties across Europe, basically by 1798, the order is bankrupt. So, as you know, when a government is bankrupt, it can't do what it needs to do, so the defenses are not what they could have been. And because there are people from the inside working for the French, that of course makes the work of Napoleon far, far easier. And the island and the knights are very divided. There are those who are for Napoleon, there are those who are for the knights. There are those who are for other possible options, and a divided party is always a weak party. So all of that together culminates in the very quick surrender of the islands.
And so just within a few years, the British Empire picks up the fruit.
Exactly. So really within 3 months, between June and September, this French government French-Maltese government on the island is trying to do something, but they can't really function. And by September of 1798, revolts are already breaking out. So what we call French rule is not much of a rule. In fact, it's more the French then locking themselves behind the walls of Valletta and trying to manage an insurrection. And that gives Britain the window of opportunity to step in as the helper, savior, depends how you look at it, of the Maltese, and eventually then to take over the islands in 1800.
And the period of empire begins for the Maltese. Now, thinking about through history, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Sicilians, the Knights of St. John, the French, and then the British, all of whom saw the strategic importance of this island in the Mediterranean. Are all of these influences, can all of them be detected in modern Malta?
To an extent, everyone left an imprint of some sort or another. One power that you did not mention were, for instance, the Arabs and the Muslims, who they're well known to have expanded into Spain, but they also were in Sicily and they were in Malta. We're talking of the High Middle Ages, just before the year 1000, those centuries before that. And one of the most important legacies that was left from that is the language. The modern Maltese language is a derivative of the Arabic that was spoken way back then. We don't know what exactly would have been like, but clearly there is a continuity there. Now, if the language survives, it's because the people survive. These people will eventually, they probably were Muslim, they eventually become Christian. Then you have the imprint of the Spanish, the Sicilians, the Knights, and the British. And the language carries a bit of all of that.
And thinking lastly of that sweep of history, where does Malta's alignment in recent years with the European Union fit in as a epoch-making event?
I think the period of the Knights had already very much aligned Malta with Europe, if you want. Sometimes I get politicians in particular who like to say that Malta of the Knights was a precursor to the European Union, because you have all these different nationalities working together, living together, fighting each other, but somehow finding a compromise. I mean, that's what the EU is in some ways.
For some countries.
For some countries. The British colonial period sort of directed Malta more towards the British Empire, eventually the Commonwealth kind of sphere. Then after independence, after 1964, it was a bit of a homecoming. It's like, let's retrace these older connections to Italy, to France, and the rest of the European continent. So joining the EU from that very long-term perspective is like refinding a certain orientation that the colonial experience had to an extent shifted us away from. Not completely, of course, but to an extent.
Of course, Malta didn't end up represented in the House of Commons, but is now well represented in the councils of the European Union. But something from the British Islands, from Scotland, of course, is a quaich, which is Gaelic for a loving cup.
Thank you.
The drill is whiskey, only Scotch in the quaich, and then round all of your historian colleagues.
I will, and they'll be pleased about it.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Join us after the break, where we look at the vibrant commercial life and the even more vibrant nightlife of Valletta, the capital of the Maltese Islands. Join us then. Welcome back. Now we go from the grand harbour of the ancient three cities of Malta to downtown Valletta in the present day. Now, right at the centre of Valletta, not far from St John's Cathedral, what you might call the commercial area of Valletta, I'm joined by Antonio D'Amato.
Yes.
And you're a guy who's been running things around here for quite a while.
Since 1885.
Because your shop, your family shop.
Yes, 5 generations, always selling music.
And so you're the oldest record shop in the world.
Yes, that's what everybody says so.
Now you took over as a lad.
I took over since 1960.
But since then you've passed on to your son.
I have passed everything to him now.
But you keep a watchful eye.
Of course, every day I come and say hello.
So shall we go and meet your boy?
Yes, of course.
Lead on, sir. Well, Anthony D'Amato, welcome to the Alex Avon Show.
Thank you very much.
This shop has been here since 1885, but not originally selling records, of course.
No. It started off, as well said, in 1885 by my great-great-grandfather. And he came from Naples and set up a shop over here in these premises with furniture. Turn of the century, between 1901 to the region of 1904, we started importing records and gramophones to obviously play the records on. And we've been here since then selling music.
Fairly early stage. Your great-grandfather realised that records were the future,
yes,
and got into them and got out of furniture.
It was the latest technology then.
So in these days, at the very early stages of recording, given your Italian background, was it Italian recordings that you were selling?
We sold mainly Italian operas because of the relationship Malta had with Italy, and we used to import most of our stuff from Italy, so it happened automatically like that. And operettas as well, Sicilian operettas, that was the main market. And in the 20s, reason being because we wanted to sell more gramophones, we decided to start producing the first Maltese songs. And we had sent 5 musicians to Italy to record, shipped the masters to the UK with HMV, and together with HMV, we produced the first Maltese records. This was sort of a long relationship with HMV, but I'm interested in the Italian operas. So this is one of the livelier areas traditionally of Valletta.
Yes. So lots of things going on here, nightlife and all the rest of it, and no doubt Italian opera booming out from the bars and the hostelries, playing your records.
Yes. Yes, and there was also foxtrot music, tangos, and the dance music of those days, so to speak.
So your shop kept Valletta dancing in the 1920s and 30s?
Kept a lot of British sailors dancing.
Now, your long relationship with HMV, I love. Here's a letter, I think, to your great-grandfather in 1929. And our last piece of correspondence, dip into history, this is very interesting, because this takes us to August 1943.
Yes.
This is when the bombs were raining down on Malta, when it was awarded the George Cross, of course, because of the endurance of people during the war. But what this shows, from HMV, from their head office in Hayes, Middlesex, that right in the middle of the conflict, they were passing on the royalties section, and trade was still continuing.
Trade was still continuing.
So the food was coming in, the provisions were coming in, the ammunition, the muniments were coming in, but so were your records.
And shops were still open. And that's quite an interesting fact, because obviously a lot of people forgot. 70, 80 years have passed. But this shows exactly what you're saying, that business remained going on and bombs were falling.
So the shop next door got blown out.
All the shops next door were bombed down, and we remained untouched here.
So if you're walking around downtown Valletta and passing a shop and you hear a very good recording of La Traviata, you probably think to yourself, my great-grandfather sold that record.
It could be. I mean, this was a box where there was the whole Traviata in 78. It was a very big box, very heavy box, and it must have been 20 records.
20 of each part of
3
the opera,
minutes on either side.
Fantastic stuff.
You can see it clearly there.
Now, are you still selling this sort of recording? Do you have rare things that you sell, or are this for people to see?
Well, we do have some 78s for sale. Obviously, people have to have a gramophone to play them on, because they don't play on the normal record player. And every now and then, people bring them in And because we also trade in used vinyl. So people bring in their vinyl and we either buy or we exchange. So sometimes people come with something like this, sometimes people come with something like that, and sometimes people come with treasures, literally treasures.
Well, the Malta record shop here in this location since 1885. But obviously, vinyl's been very much part of your past and history.
It always was.
Would you say it's going to be part of the future as well?
Well, it survived 100 years. Probably might survive another 100 or more.
Well, I've got great hopes for vinyl. I can't guarantee its survival. I take what you say about the better recordings, but I'll tell you what I can do, and that's to present you with the Alex Salmond Quake for appearing on the show. Now, the drill...
Thank you very, very much.
And this is almost as old and established as the vinyl records. There's whiskey in the Quake, passed round friends and family. Only Scotch, man, only Scotch.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much.
Anthony, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thanks. So, Andrea Ambrola, you're going to show me some of the highlights of the nightlife of Malta, because this was a nunnery here.
Yes, indeed. It's in fact a nunnery from the cloister nuns.
And right next door is the legendary Straight Street.
Yes,
so let's
this
go
is
take a
Straight
look.
Street. This is the area called the Gut.
So we're in Straight Street, nunnery on one side, the bars on the other side, the paying customers and their tables here. So this has all been redeveloped right down this side.
Yes, completely. This whole section of Straight Street, which was all bars and restaurants even in the olden days. In fact, we kept the names of all the bars. We also renovated some really cool old signs.
And you're still renovating, I see, and some classy joints now.
Yes, very much indeed. The largest of them all is the Silver Horse.
Huh?
And here is where we have our cabaret.
And what's up here?
That's where the bands play.
Oh, so the band plays up there?
Yes, yes. Well, over here we've got regular jazz events, which are the attraction of the whole place.
Well, I'll be seeing you later, man. Come and show me in. Thank you. Andrea Ambroli, Dr. Andrea Ambroli, tell me something about Straight Street. I mean, for hundreds of years, this was this nightlife of Valletta, the nightlife of Malta, really. A bit like Malta's equivalent of Soho in London, was it not?
Hi, Alec. Yes, very much indeed. Straight Street has a very colorful history. It originated at the time of the Knights. It was the back door of Valletta, and this narrow street was created to serve the whole peninsula from top to bottom.
So for hundreds of years, both Maltesers and sailors of a whole variety of nationalities would make a beeline to Straight Street when the ship came in.
100%. Straight Street was always the first place the sailors would visit after landing on the island, and probably even, you know, they leave their hearts here for a while as well.
And then, of course, legendary in literature and very much part of the story of the island, but had fallen on some pretty hard times in recent years.
Yes, as soon as the Brits left Malta in the late 70s, Straight Street fell into complete disrepair. It didn't find a use at that time, and I would say, you know, for the last 30 years, Straight Street had seen no investment. During the last 5 years, we have gone into a very fast and creative mode into getting back Straight Street, into giving it a new lease of life.
The Junior College have been redeveloping, but not quite recreating the old Straight Street, apart from some retro examples, but looking for a whole variety of slightly more upmarket entertainment. Would that be right?
Yes, what we aimed for is to give Malta a hub of entertainment where the older generation, the 30, 40 plus people visiting Malta, or even the Maltese, would have an option not just to dine out, but to dine out, attend a cabaret, burlesque, tango shows, comedy nights, murder mystery, and various other forms of entertainment. So it's still linked very much to how Straight Street was, because Straight Street was a hub of entertainment and lots of artists came out of Straight Street, but obviously reinterpreted in a different way.
Well, not everybody, of course, was happy with your plans, but luckily you received solid support from the nunnery next door.
Yes, indeed. It might come as a surprise, but the cloister nuns next door, actually, at a certain point, we encountered a stumbling block during the permit stage, and the nuns supported the project.
Well, best of luck for reviving one of Malta's great traditions, and to celebrate it, this is the Quake, Scots Gaelic for the Loving Cup. You know the drill. Whiskey in the quake, only Scotch, and passed round all your customers.
Thank you very much, Alec. And you know that I play the bagpipe.
Ah, that's why you're a doctor.
Yeah.
Thank you. In this series, we've focused on the Mediterranean island of Malta, its turbulent past and its lively present. Most of all, we've looked at the spectacular economic progress of the island in recent years as the European Union's smallest nation. In a reality which will seem richly ironic to many in Brexit Britain, Malta has become more independent and more successful as a member state of Europe. Economic success has brought with it its own challenges. The brutal murder in 2017 of campaigning journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia was damaging to the island's international reputation and has crystallised concerns as to whether hot money and corruption might overpower the small country's political and judicial system. Environmental issues are moving to the top of the political agenda as this crowded island copes with the breakneck development of a tiger economy. Malta is once again on the front line of Europe as the prosperous continent struggles with the consequences of civil breakdown in the Middle East and Africa. However, Malta has the key ingredients to address these issues: a strong and disputatious political debate, a lively and free press. In the respected Democracy Index published by the Economist Intelligence Unit, the island nation ranks 18th in the world, just 4 places below the United Kingdom, and with a rather more impressive score for the effective functionality of government. Throughout its lively and turbulent history, Malta has been renowned for the friendliness and hospitality of its people, a factor noted by the shipwrecked Apostle Paul some 2,000 years ago. Some things don't change, and the reality of the sea and the temper of the people are 2 of those. As we've heard, back in the 1950s, the Times of London didn't give much credence to the prospects of the island without British rule. In reality, Malta has now celebrated 55 years as an independent country, 15 years as a European member state, and the state of the island nation is strong. Next week, we complete our series on the politics of protest in the UK. With a summer of protest in London, Paris, Hong Kong and Moscow, what is the best way to get your point across in a multimedia world? Is it the mass demonstration or the single-person campaign? And now from Taz and me and from the rest of the show, it's goodbye for now.